Heinz's reaction was immediate. You understand what happens if you file that. The legal gesture carried technical weight far beyond its digital simplicity. Transfer requests triggered automatic evaluations. For an adult draconid to allow a human to claim feeding rights would upend every cultural protocol in play. The terminal chimed midpoint in the station's artificial day cycle. Somewhere in the residential rings, Kestra would be finishing her midday hydration, if she'd been served. Draconid meal deliveries ran on tight biological schedules. Thomas tapped the submission key. The station's core AI processed the request in 4 seconds, standard for non-combat petitions. Its response came without embellishment. Transfer conditionally approved pending ward consent. Noted objection threshold met under Article 9, Clause 44, Interspecies Emergency Guardianship Provisions. Heinz made a noise low in her throat. Emergency provisions? Those are famine and plague protocols. There was a data packet attached to the ruling. Medical scans, unauthorized, probably lifted from the Draconid medic's own files. Kestra's wing structures were intact, fully developed. The neural pathways simply stopped communicating past T3 vertebrae. The AI had highlighted a particularly damning comparison. Kestra's scans beside those of a healthy juvenile draconid. The structures were identical down to the millimeter. Only the activation patterns differed, hers showing no signal transmission beyond the injury point. Heinz crossed her arms. That, she said very quietly, is a problem for them. Thomas turned toward the viewport again. The Draconid cruiser still hung there, motionless. Somewhere aboard that ship, a delegation was realizing the same thing. Atmospheric processors cycled in the background, station's way of marking artificial evening. Oblivious to the tension, the day-night lights began their gradual dimming. What happened next wouldn't wait for morning. The ship-to-station comm system lit with an incoming request. Not from the diplomatic band. Personal frequencies only crew used for off-record conversations. The ID string was scrambled, but the origin point wasn't. Berth D12. Thomas accepted the link. Kestra's reflection appeared in the polished surface of the terminal. Distorted by the curve of the screen, she met his eyes through the indirect. Contact, a draconid gesture meaning I accept but don't. Wish to force reciprocity. Her voice came through with the faint static of a jury-rigged connection. You should decline the guardianship. The standard words were precise, clearly rehearsed. I cost more than engines. Thomas's response was already forming, automatic, then stopped. He leaned forward, intent suddenly shifting. Say that again. In Draconic, Kestra froze. Her secondary ears flattened. The phrase she'd used had come out in perfect, accentless standard. But no Draconid child would ever compare themselves to machinery. At the center of the station's diplomatic wing, the real-time translation database sparked to life, flagging discrepancies. The linguistic patterns didn't match. Certain constructs Kestra used were archaic, formal, the kind found in historical texts, not contemporary hatchling education. Heinz saw it the same moment Thomas did. They taught her to say that. The implications unfolded without needing articulation. Someone had carefully instructed Kestra on how to reject assistance, programmed the exact phrases that would trigger human assumptions about Draconid pride. Kestra's reflection shimmered as the connection wavered. She wasn't speaking from her quarters. The background showed the sharp angles of a cargo hold, probably slipped away during some maintenance routine. Her claws gripped something out of frame, the tension visible even through the shaky feed. Thomas turned the terminal slightly, letting Kestra see his own hands, the guardianship form still glowing on the screen. He didn't ask another question, just waited. The intership feed crackled, likely from Kestra adjusting an ill-fitting earpiece. When she spoke again, the phrasing was undeniably her own, syntax stuttering between languages. They told me, it is like when engines won't fire. You replace them. Heinz made a sharp gesture toward the legal feed. The station's records were updating in real time, highlighting the relevant passages from Draconid educational modules. Maintenance analogies for biological shortcomings were a standard teaching tool. Kestra's inner eyelids flicked sideways, a Draconid attempt to compose oneself. The feed cut for 2 seconds, then reconnected. She'd moved closer to whatever camera she'd patched into, her face now occupying most of the frame. She spoke fast, the words tumbling like she'd been holding them a long time. Draconids don't fix things. she said, not bitterly, but with the flat certainty of someone stating an obvious fact. We replaced them. Thomas touched the acceptance key. The station's legal system processed it instantly, the form changing from pending to active in one irreversible transition. No Draconid protest could override an accepted guardianship once registered in the galactic database. Kestra made a sound no translator could parse, part gasp, part something distinctly Draconid with no direct human equivalent. The connection severed abruptly. One station over, the Draconid cruiser's running lights flickered in an unusual pattern. Not any standard alert. If Thomas had to guess, someone had just spilled a drink over crucial controls. Hines exhaled sharply through her nose. That's going in the incident log. She didn't sound displeased. The station's commissary schedule updated automatically on Thomas's terminal. Guardian privileges granted him access to Kestra's dietary profile, right down to the real-time adjustment option. He set the evening meal for double portions before closing the interface. Outside, the Draconid ship's engines powered up. Not departure levels, but enough to send a vibration through the docking clamps. Standard procedure when preparing for sudden movement. Someone was making contingency plans. Thomas stood, stretching his arms until the joints popped. The guardianship approval pinged on his wrist unit, followed almost immediately by a second notification. This one from the station's medical bay. An unscheduled equipment request. Someone had just accessed the rehabilitation supplies inventory. He scrolled through the list. Therapeutic resistance bars, neuromuscular stimulators, zero-gravity training harnesses. Every item precisely calculated to do the one thing Draconid culture considered impossible. Repair what was broken, rather than discard it. Hines met his eyes over the display. Emergency provisions, she repeated, this time with an entirely different inflection. The station's night cycle lighting reached its dimmest point, just bright enough to read by, just dark enough to require focus. Somewhere beyond those walls, in quarters that had never seen proper use, Kestra was receiving the first unmonitored meal in her life. On the Draconid ship, senior diplomats were convening emergency sessions. And on a database light years away, the Galactic Legal Registry updated itself with one tiny change in status. Thomas left the terminal running, the acceptance confirmation still glowing. There would be consequences. Credits owed, permits contested. But for now, one fact overrode all others. The station's systems now recognized Kestra as someone's responsibility to keep alive. Not because she was useful, but because someone had chosen to say she mattered. The commissary timer chimed, marking the dinner hour. Somewhere on the station, a food dispenser activated, initiating a meal sequence it had never been programmed to prepare before. The accounting office smelled of disinfectant and ozone, too clean, like they'd scrubbed away all traces of organic presence before this meeting. Vrath, the trade liaison, didn't sit, preferring to loom over the projection table where Kestra's life had been reduced to numerical values. His decorative talon sheaths clicked against the metal surface as he tapped the final summation into the air between them. 20,000 credits seems fair compensation for lost property. Thomas scrolled through the line items. Mobility harness maintenance, 800 credits monthly. Modified quarters, 12,000 installation plus 600 upkeep. Even her food got itemized, specialized nutrient blends at triple standard ration costs. The total glowed a soft amber, just below the threshold for urgent debt classification. His terminal displayed his entire savings account, 11,340 credits. 2 years of hazard pay from asteroid patrols. Half a cycle's worth of dock repair bonuses. Vrath's secondary nostrils flared when the number projected, a Draconid tell for suppressed amusement. He didn't comment on the shortfall, just produced a second document with a flick of his wrist claws. Alternative payment arrangements exist. The new file bore no official seals, just coordinates and timestamps. Patrol routes, smuggler entry points, human security codes marked with departmental abbreviations. Thomas knew 3 as current within hours, the kind of intel that got informants killed. Under galactic conventions, sharing them carried the same penalty as firing on an allied vessel. Vrath's crest feathers lay flat against his skull, the Draconid equivalent of a poker face. His talon traced the edge of Thomas's datapad. We understand human currency. Extends beyond mere credits. The implication hung between them like a charged particle. Historical. Archives recorded 3 civilizations that treated disability as financial transactions. The Tsil exchanged imperfect offspring for trade concessions. Calaxian families could purchase exemptions from mandatory euthanasia edicts. Less than 2 centuries ago, the Gathani Consortium still listed disabled citizens as tax deductions under resource reallocation allowances. Draconid traditionalists called it unnatural tampering. Their medical texts advocated for accepting biological limits rather than challenging them. A wingless draconid who couldn't fly by third molting was simply following the natural order. Intervention violated fundamental truths about their species' identity. Human neurology disagreed. Studies showed 72% of so-called permanent disabilities stemmed from miscommunication between body parts rather than structural flaws, nerves that forgot how to talk to muscles, signals that got lost along well-paved roads. The treatment wasn't surgery or drugs, just relentless repetition, forcing the pathways to remember what they were built to do. Kestra's first session lasted 11 minutes. The stimulator cycled through its sequences while Thomas counted the intervals aloud. Her claws dug into the therapy bars hard enough to leave indents. By the 70th pulse, her secondary ears lay flat against her skull, a draconid distress signal. But when Dr. Martinez moved to shut the machine off, Kestra's hand shot out faster than anyone expected. Again, her voice didn't shake. The electrostimulation left her trembling, her underdeveloped flight muscles twitching in sporadic bursts, but the demand was clear. Dr. Martinez exchanged glances with Thomas before increasing the intensity by 5%. The new setting made Kestra's tail stiffen, the spiked tip tapping in a rhythmic pattern against the examination table. 3 weeks passed in a cycle of soreness and stubbornness. Mornings began with electrode application, afternoons with resistance exercises in Maintenance Bay 12. The Draconid delegation lodged formal protests, first about unauthorized medical procedures, then later, when Kestra's wings began showing increased muscle definition, about provoking false hope. The station's comm system recorded every accusation. Senior Wingmaster Vrath's transmissions grew particularly vitriolic. "You're making her body lie," he snarled during one open-channel exchange. His image flickered in the bay's projection unit, distorted by the interference from nearby machinery. "No hatchling develops flight capacity past." Kestra shut off the feed with a decisive claw swipe. She didn't engage with the arguments, just positioned herself under the makeshift gravity harness Thomas had rigged from cargo straps and began another set of wing extensions. The routine was always the same. Stretch until the newly awakened muscles burned, rest precisely 90 seconds, repeat. The unnatural therapy showed results human medics considered textbook. By day 18, Kestra could maintain a mid-range extension for 3 minutes straight, long enough to trigger the draconid equivalent of muscle memory. Small tremors ran along her wings during these holds, the membrane fluttering like a sail testing the wind. On the morning of day 22, the involuntary twitch came without warning. Kestra had just finished a stim session, her wings limp with exhaustion. As Thomas helped remove the electrodes, her left wing jerked, not the spastic tremor of overworked muscles, but a controlled upward flick that sent a ripple through the membrane. The movement lasted less than a second, but in the sudden stillness that followed, even the station's ventilation system seemed to pause. Kestra's inner eyelids flicked sideways 3 times in rapid succession, a physiological reaction draconids only displayed during moments of profound cognitive shift. Thomas didn't congratulate her, just held out the stimulator controls, raised an eyebrow. Kestra took them with claws that barely shook this time. She adjusted the settings, herself another act of quiet defiance increasing. The pulse duration, but lowering the intensity. Smart. The kind of calibration someone makes when they finally understand how their own body works. Dr. Martinez's next scan revealed what the twitch had already confirmed. Bright gold pathways now lit up the previously gray sections of Kestra's neural map. Weak signals, but undeniable. The display rendered them as branching rivers finally carving their way through dry land. Vrath's next complaint arrived with unusual hesitation in the phrasing. Not a condemnation this time, but an inquiry wrapped in bureaucratic language. Did the humans have peer-reviewed studies to support their methods? Were the results replicable across Draconid physiology? The subtext was clear. Traditionalists were losing ground. Kestra took over her own therapy schedule soon after, waking before station dawn to run through resistance exercises, timing her electrostim sessions to the minute. Her wings gained definition not in the smooth Draconid way, but in jagged bursts of progress. One day she'd manage a partial flare. 3 days later, she'd hold the position through an entire muscle fatigue cycle. The medical feed logged each milestone. Muscle mass increased by 17%. Neural activation up to 43% of normal flight capacity. The numbers didn't tell the whole story. The way Kestra now carried herself with less reliance on the mobility chair, or how her wing displays during Draconid meal rituals, stopped being purely symbolic. Maintenance Bay 12 became their unofficial training ground. The space smelled of lubricants and ozone from nearby machinery, the floor scarred by decades of heavy equipment. Cargo crates served as makeshift obstacles. Thomas marked takeoff distances with spray paint on the deck plates. Each colored line represented another threshold crossed, another limit disproven. On the morning of the first real flight attempt, Kestra's usual routine changed. No stimulators, no warm-up reps, just standing at the far end of the bay, her wings flexing in measured extensions. The overhead lights caught the new muscle definition along her back, the once dormant pathways now responding as if they'd never been silent. The attempt lasted 4 seconds. Enough time for 7 wing beats, a stumble mid-air, and a crashing landing into stacked supply crates. Kestra emerged with a split lip scale and her left wing bent at an awkward angle. But when Thomas rushed forward, she was laughing. A rough, unpracticed sound most Draconids would consider undignified. They reset the crates. Adjusted the harness. Kestra wiped the blue-tinged blood from her mouth and took position again without being asked. The second attempt lasted 6 seconds. The third, 9. Each crash left new bruises, but Kestra's claws kept finding purchase on the deck grates, pushing her upright with something that looked like joy. By station night cycle, she could cross half the bay before gravity won the argument. Thomas peeled a coolant pack from the medical kit, pressed it against the worst of Kestra's emerging bruises. She took it without comment, holding the cold compress against her wing joint with one claw, while the other adjusted the stimulator settings yet again. Dr. Martinez's nightly scan appeared on their shared feed without preamble. The latest neural map showed gold pathways now covering 61% of the previously inactive zones. The accompanying message contained no medical jargon, just a single line from an old human physical therapy manual. The body learns fastest when it has something to reach for. Kestra read it twice, then powered down the stimulator, stood on shaky legs, and walked back to the starting line. Her wings spread to their full span, still uneven, still weaker than any natural Draconids, but unmistakably functional. The cargo bay lights threw her shadow against the far wall, elongated and impossibly winged. Maintenance Bay 12 wasn't built for flight training. The cavernous space hummed with the vibrations of nearby engines, its walls lined with spare parts and oil-stained storage crates. Dim work lights cast long shadows across the floor grates, just enough illumination to avoid tripping over loose cables, not enough to chase away the perpetual station night gloom. The air carried the sharp metallic scent of coolant and the earthier tang of ozone from overworked electrical systems. Not ideal conditions for rehabilitation, but it had 2 crucial advantages: privacy and an abundance of equipment to repurpose. Thomas arrived first each evening, sorting through discarded cargo straps and loose fasteners. The materials weren't designed for medical use, but that didn't matter. A few adjustments turned a heavy-duty strap into a wing resistance harness. Spare gravity stabilizers provided variable resistance when wired inversely. Even the floor markings meant for guiding forklifts became measurement grids for tracking progress. Everything in the bay served double duty now, its original function erased by necessity and ingenuity. Kestra's sessions always began the same way: 14 minutes of electrostimulation along dormant neural pathways, followed by resistance exercises adapted from human physical therapy manuals. Station gravity made everything harder. Unlike Draconid homeworld conditions, the full weight pulled constantly at underdeveloped wing muscles. Water barrels intended for coolant storage became makeshift training tools when filled to specific levels. Submerging her wings created resistance in all directions, simulating aerial maneuvers while keeping the strain measurable. Thomas discovered the videos spread when his morning coffee failed to materialize. The station's food dispensers were offline, not malfunctioning, deliberately locked by Draconid techs protesting unauthorized biomechanical tampering. He found Kestra already in Bay 12, running diagnostics on her harness. Her claws moved with methodical precision, adjusting tension calibrations that had been sabotaged overnight. She didn't acknowledge the video's existence, just pointed to a new stack of cargo containers. Higher platform today. The cultural attaché's meeting request arrived mid-morning. Official station letterhead, polite phrasing, all the standard diplomatic cues. Thomas arrived early to find the conference room empty. No attaché, no aides. Just a cooling cup of Yuri tea left on the table. A Draconid gesture, meaning await further contact. His wrist unit pinged 19 minutes past the scheduled time with a cancellation notice citing unavoidable scheduling. Conflict, the subtext was clear. Someone powerful wanted plausible deniability. Kestra's first fan message arrived through back channels, a data crystal smuggled inside a maintenance drone. The recording showed a Draconid female cradling a hatchling whose wings hung limp. The translator rendered her plea in halting standard. My clutch son's pathways show similar dormancy. Can your methods help? The question lingered in Bay 12's humid air long after playback ended. Kestra ran a claw along the crystal's edge, her inner eyelids flicking sideways. A tell Thomas recognized as her version of stunned silence. Work continued through the controversy. Flight drills grew more complex, incorporating aerial turns and controlled descents. The sabotage attempts grew equally sophisticated, subtle adjustments to harness mechanisms, lubricants switched for adhesive compounds, even the oxygen mix in Bay 12 altered to induce fatigue. They adapted. Thomas cross-checked every piece of equipment. Kestra learned to taste test the air for molecular changes before exerting herself. The video's consequences rippled outward. A delegation of Draconid physicians arrived unexpectedly, their scanning equipment conspicuously similar to Dr. Martinez's neural mappers. Station security noted their unauthorized access attempts to human medical databases. Oddly, they made no effort to hide their activities, as if wanting to be caught. The lead physician's credentials identified her as a specialist in neuromuscular disorders. Her team's equipment cases bore fresh scrape marks where traditionalist insignias had been removed. Messages from other disabled Draconids trickled in through increasingly creative channels. One arrived via waste disposal drone, tucked between recyclable panels. Another was baked into an otherwise standard nutrition loaf, a data chip wrapped in heat-resistant polymer. Each contained similar pleas. Hatchlings with underdeveloped wings, adolescents injured in training accidents, even one elder whose flight capability had atrophied after prolonged zero-gravity service. The numbers contradicted official Draconid claims of rare congenital defects. Kestra began compiling responses during rest intervals between flights. Her talons proved surprisingly adept at keying messages on human touchscreens. Claws retracted just enough to avoid scratching the surface. The advice was always practical: neural stimulation frequencies, muscle-building exercises, dietary adjustments to support regeneration. Nothing revolutionary, just human physical therapy principles translated into Draconid biological terms. She signed each message with a single glyph, her personal mark, a wing shape bisected by a lightning bolt. Traditionalists retaliated through legal channels. New regulations appeared on station boards, restrictions on cross-species medical consultations, requirements for proven efficacy standards before sharing therapeutic techniques. The language was carefully crafted to sound reasonable while being impossible to satisfy. Enforcement proved spotty. Junior crew members looked the other way when they spotted data exchanges. Maintenance staff conveniently misplaced citation forms. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Elder Selenith, the most vocal traditionalist critic, requested a private audience. Not in formal chambers, but in the station's hydroponic gardens, where the humidity mimicked Draconid homeworld conditions. Her opening statement bypassed diplomacy entirely. "Show me the wing extension maneuver from the video. No recording devices present." "No witnesses beyond the gently rustling ferns," Kestra complied. The garden's open space allowed for longer flight paths than Bay 12's confines. Her takeoff lacked the powerful spring of naturally trained draconids, relying instead on careful momentum builds. The flight itself was halting. 7 meters forward, 2 wing-assisted turns, an unsteady landing that required 1 stumbling step. But undeniable. Selenith observed without comment, her crest feathers rising and falling in minute adjustments. When Kestra finished, the elder performed something astonishing. She spread her own wings to full span, then deliberately folded them into the restricted posture of a hatchling's first molting. A draconid gesture of humility unseen in living memory from one of her status. "The texts say Perexus flew crooked at first," she murmured before departing. That night, Station Command received a priority message from the draconid homeworld. The language was obtuse even by diplomatic standards, full of conditional phrases and caveats. Buried in paragraph 14 was the critical line. Certain experimental therapies may be permitted under ancestral precedent guidelines. Not an endorsement. Not a retraction of earlier condemnations, but a crack in the dam. The next morning, 73 messages awaited Kestra's attention, more than the station's comm system could technically hold without overflow protocols activating. Engineers found creative solutions, routing extra storage capacity from deprecated systems. Word was spreading beyond draconid circles now. Queries came from Tzil with stunted flight sacks, even a human spacer asking about adapting the techniques for zero-gravity muscle atrophy. Bay 12's equipment improved incrementally. Someone donated a proper zero-G simulator, not the jury-rigged harness they'd been using. Medical supplies appeared without requisition forms. Fresh electrode patches, specialized scale ointments, even a draconid-designed wing brace still bearing manufacturer tags. The donors remained anonymous, but Kestra recognized the clan markings etched into the brace's fasteners. Selenith's lineage. Thomas monitored the logistics with quiet amusement. Station systems weren't built for this kind of organic collaboration. Official channels couldn't process requests that bypassed hierarchy. The workarounds multiplied. Cargo manifests showed miscellaneous rehabilitation equipment, where specificity would have triggered regulatory review. Maintenance schedules listed Bay 12 as under structural recalibration for hours when flight drills ran long. The cultural attaché finally made contact, though not through formal channels. She appeared at Bay 12's service entrance during third shift, her ceremonial robe swapped for utilitarian station coveralls. No recording devices. No pretense of diplomacy, just a single question. "How many can you teach?" Kestra's answer was already waiting. A data crystal containing training regimens sorted by neurological profiles. The attaché pocketed it without examining the contents. Her parting remark hovered in the bay's recycled air long after she left. "They're calling it the Skyborn Protocol now." Nobody had to ask who they were. News feeds picked up the term within hours. Analysts debated whether it represented genuine cultural shift or strategic rebranding. Younger draconids adopted it without hesitation. Hashtags proliferated across social platforms, many accompanied by footage of their own tentative wing exercises. Traditionalist media outlets scrambled to reframe the narrative, some claiming the techniques merely fulfilled latent potential rather than creating new ability. The most telling development happened off-camera. Station medics reported a sudden surge in draconid neural scans, all requested under vague diagnostic pretenses, all focusing on T3, T7 spinal regions. None of the scans showed structural damage, just dormant pathways waiting for the right signals. The draconid delegation's protests arrived like clockwork. Official missives decrying unauthorized medical tampering appeared in Thomas's inbox daily, each more creatively worded than the last. One particularly irate communique compared their sessions to forcing a combustion engine to function without pistons, a flawed analogy that made Dr. Martinez snort her morning coffee. Less formal objections circulated through station gossip channels. Whispers about wasting resources, about delaying the inevitable, about how no draconid in history had ever achieved flight after third molting. Kestra absorbed the criticism without comment. Her focus remained on the barrel ahead of her, the water sloshing against its sides as she worked through another set of extensions. Each movement sent ripples cascading across the surface, visible proof of effort where her wings met resistance. Blue-tinged bruises mottled her joints from earlier failures, but she adjusted her grip on the barrel's rim and pushed through another repetition. Thomas monitored from a careful distance, making incremental adjustments to the harness lines. Too much assistance would defeat the purpose. Too little risked injury. The delicate balance required constant recalibration as Kestra's capabilities evolved. His datapad logged every session, duration, wing beat frequency, even the minute temperature changes in her wing membranes that indicated overexertion. Progress came in jagged increments. One evening she'd managed 3 consecutive full extensions. The next, a setback would leave her struggling with movements mastered days prior. The inconsistencies frustrated Kestra more than the physical strain. Her claws often left fresh gouges in the therapy bars when exercises went poorly. Thomas learned to interpret the subtle tells, how her secondary ears flattened before giving up, how her tail coiled tighter with each failed attempt. The bay's security cameras became an unexpected barometer of shifting opinions. Initially, footage from their sessions circulated among Draconid traditionalists as cautionary evidence. Then the angle mysteriously adjusted to exclude Kestra's form during critical moments. By the 3rd week, entire sessions went unrecorded, gaps in surveillance no one officially acknowledged. The night of the 6-inch liftoff passed without ceremony. Kestra had been working on takeoff maneuvers for days, using cargo crates as makeshift platforms. The stacked containers formed an uneven ramp, 5 tiers approximating the height needed for initial propulsion. Thomas watched from the control panel, fingers hovering over the emergency dampeners in case of bad falls. Kestra's first 3 attempts ended as expected. Unsteady wing beats, frantic scrambling for balance, inevitable crashes into padded barriers. On the 4th try, something changed. Her launch push carried more force than usual, wings snapping open with cleaner precision. For 6 seconds she hovered, body parallel to the floor, claws barely grazing the raised platform. Then gravity reasserted itself, sending her tumbling into the waiting crash mats. Neither of them spoke. The bay's lighting flickered overhead, as if the station itself hesitated to make sense of what happened. Thomas checked the sensor logs. The readings confirmed it. 6 inches of sustained elevation, 7 complete wing beats, 0 external assistance from the harness. When he looked up, Kestra was already repositioning herself on the platform. Her breathing came harder now, wing membranes flexing with residual tremors, but her claws found fresh purchase on the crate edges. The quiet determination in her posture needed no translation. They ran 7 more trials before the station's night cycle alarm signaled curfew. Each attempt yielded fractional improvements, an extra inch here, a smoother landing there. Kestra's scales gleamed with exertion. The thin membranes between her wing joints flushed darker with increased blood flow. Every Draconid anatomy text claimed those membranes should remain pale in wingless individuals. The evidence of their inaccuracy clung to Kestra's frame, irrefutable and shining. As they packed up equipment, a noise came from the bay's secondary entrance, a service hatch usually locked during 3rd shift. The elderly SIL janitor shuffled in, his multi-jointed limbs making short work of the cluttered floor. He said nothing, just placed a scrap of recycled data paper on a nearby crate and departed. The note contained 14 words in rough standard. Pyrexis the Determined also fell 300 times before first flight. Bay 34 at dawn, Thomas recognized the name. Pyrexis appeared in Draconid legends, the first of their kind to achieve transcontinental flight. Official histories always omitted his early struggles, focusing instead on triumphant later voyages. That someone remembered the truth and chose to share it now spoke volumes. Kestra studied the note longer than necessary, her inner eyelids flicking sideways twice, a tell Thomas now recognized as suppressed emotion. She folded the paper precisely and tucked it into her harness without comment, but when they resumed work the following evening, she'd added a new tally sheet to the bay's wall, a running count of attempts and outcomes. The first entry read simply, Attempt 8, 6 inches progress. News of their unofficial training ground spread quietly. Supplies began appearing near the bay's entrance, extra crash padding from the station gym, a portable hydration system left by an unknown donor, even a few specialized wing braces marked with medbay inventory codes. The gifts never came with notes, but their origins became obvious when Thomas noticed a pair of Draconid junior diplomats lingering near the service corridor. Their feigned indifference dissolved the moment Kestra completed an 8-inch hover. claws darting out to steady each other in shock. The Draconid delegation's protests took on a new tone after that. Where earlier complaints had been furious, now they carried an edge of uncertainty. Legal objections shifted from prohibited medical procedures to unregulated training environments. A subtle but significant concession that something worth regulating was happening. Even Vrath's messages lost their bite, replaced by formal inquiries about documenting experimental methods. Kestra paid no mind to the politics. Her world had narrowed to the cargo bay's makeshift obstacles, the incremental adjustments to her harness, the growing tally on the wall. Each session added another line to the count. Attempt 22, 9 inches. Progress. Attempt 31, 11 inches. Progress. The numbers stacked up like steps on an invisible ladder, each one a quiet rebuttal to every limitation ever imposed on her. The bay's security cameras remained conspicuously offline during key moments. No one ever commented on the malfunctions. The video circulated at 0342 station time, low-quality footage with a timestamp glitching in the upper corner. Grainy, dimly lit, filmed from some hidden alcove in Maintenance Bay 12. The angle caught Kestra mid-maneuver, wings flaring unevenly as she pushed off from stacked cargo crates. 1 meter of clearance, 7 wing beats holding altitude, then the wobble, the crash into waiting mats. The clip looped endlessly across 3 systems before dawn, shared with captions that ranged from skeptical to awestruck. Draconid High Command's response came within hours. The official statement used words like heresy and abomination, calling the footage digitally manipulated, propaganda. Their medical division issued contradictory addendums first, denying the possibility of late-onset flight capacity, then demanding access to human neural retraining techniques for verification purposes. Traditionalists staged protest walks through the station's commerce rings, ceremonial wing sheaths clicking in disapproval. Station comms logged 4,387 messages about the video in the first 12 hours. Analysis showed 87% positive engagement, with spikes among younger Draconids. The metrics revealed something interesting. Most negative comments came from accounts over 40 cycles old. The generational divide became obvious when a junior diplomat's private message leaked. If this is heresy, why does it look like the first flight legends? History offered precedents. The introduction of voice synthesizers for mute Calaxians had sparked riots. Early Tizil limb prosthetics were banned as unnatural constructs before becoming standard medicine. Even human history recorded similar patterns. Cochlear implants once labeled defilements, gene therapies decried as playing God. The backlash followed a predictable curve. Outrage, then cautious acceptance, then eventual adoption as the new baseline. Kestra's wings snapped open the moment her feet left the ground, catching the ceremonial hall's carefully calibrated air currents. The motion wasn't the powerful sweep of natural flyers, but something more deliberate. Each extension maximizing every newton of force her retrained muscles could produce. They rose in slow spirals around the central obelisk, Thomas's grip shifting subtly to counterbalance each wing beat. For 6 minutes, the only sounds were wing rustle and the occasional creak of harness leather. Kestra's voice rang clear through the silence as she recited the adoption vows, each phrase timed to their ascension. Traditionalists later noted with grudging respect that she used the oldest dialect, the one reserved for clan-head ceremonies. The descent became their first true flight test. Without training harnesses or crash mats, any misstep would send them tumbling onto unforgiving stone. Kestra's left wing faltered once, a muscle group still regaining strength. But Thomas adjusted his grip instinctively, compensating until she recovered rhythm. Their landing was less graceful than takeoff, requiring 2 stumbling steps before finding balance, but the oath required touchdown on the central dais. They hit the mark dead center. Elder Selenith approached with the ceremonial branding iron, its glowing tip configured to human-safe temperatures. The mark would sear onto Thomas's forearm above his station identification tattoo, twin wing scars framing Kestra's clan sigil. A visible claim no future Draconid authority could dispute. Later footage showed the moment the iron touched skin, how Kestra's claws flexed in sympathetic response, how Thomas's jaw tightened but he didn't flinch, The scent of seared flesh mingled with ceremonial incense, an olfactory combination no one present would forget. When Selenith withdrew the iron, she did something unprecedented, pressed her forehead briefly to the fresh mark. A gesture of deep clan bond no elder had ever bestowed on an adopted member. Post-ceremony analysis would note how quickly factions reorganized after that moment. Traditionalists who'd planned protests left without filing grievances. Reformists circulated draft proposals for similar adoptions of species friends. Junior clan members clustered around Thomas. Their ceremonial scarves offered for him to wipe the branding site. A hygienic gesture transformed into ritual. The amendment's practical effects manifested within hours. Medical dispensaries reported increased requests for neural stimulators from wing-impaired draconids. Station schools received queries about adaptive physical education programs. Most strikingly, 3 major shipping clans announced new ergonomic standards for non-flight-capable crew members. A business decision framed as ancestral obligation. Kestra discovered the returned 20,000. Credits in her account that evening. No attached. Message beyond a transaction. Code matching the amendment's research fund allocation. She transferred the entire sum to Dr. Martinez's adaptive therapy lab within minutes, her claws moving with the same precision she'd once reserved for flight drills. Thomas found her later on the observation deck, the new clan mark still throbbing under its medicated dressing. She wasn't watching the stars but reviewing schematics, an adaptive flight harness redesigned for hatchlings. The model incorporated human safety features alongside draconid ceremonial requirements. He didn't ask why she was working, just leaned against the railing beside her, his shadow merging with hers on the deck plates. Clan scouts delivered the first practical test of their status before dawn. A wing-stunted hatchling from a traditionalist family, smuggled aboard a grain freighter. The youngling's caretakers hadn't waited for official policy changes. Their desperation outran bureaucracy. Kestra examined the hatchling's underdeveloped joints without comment, then summoned Thomas with a glance. Their first training session as sworn clan siblings began that same hour, the maintenance bay's cargo lights casting long shadows across the newest tally sheet. Someone had already marked the first entry. Attempt 1. Progress guaranteed. The Meridian Adaptive Center's main hall hummed with the collective sounds of 47 draconids pushing their limits. The air carried the sharp scent of electrostim units cycling through sequences, overlaying the deeper musk of draconid exertion. Kestra moved between training stations with a slight hitch in her step, the lingering trace of her original imbalance. But no one noticed anymore. Her students had their own asymmetries to manage. Some used modified flight harnesses. Others relied on neural accelerators jacked directly into their spinal ports. The space rejected aesthetic perfection in favor of functional diversity. 5 years after that first festival flight, Kestra's training philosophy had crystallized into a pedagogical approach station academics dubbed imperfect flight. Where traditional draconid instruction demanded flawless aerial maneuvers from day one, her methods celebrated incremental progress. The center's walls displayed holograms of famous historical flights, not the polished final products but the shaky early attempts. Pyrexis's legendary transcontinental journey appeared as a series of crashing failures before the triumphant final reel. Discrimination hadn't disappeared overnight. 3 graduates stood by the observation windows wearing the distinctive armbands of establishments that had denied them service. The tallest flexed her surgically reconstructed wings in deliberate provocation each time traditionalist delegates passed by. The Skyborn Movement's legal team had already filed 17 injunction requests on their behalf, all pending, none expected to fail. Thomas's security detail reflected the changes. His 3 newest officers included a human with spinal actuators, a Tsil whose breathing apparatus doubled as a comms relay, and a draconid missing half her left wing. Their presence at diplomatic checkpoints forced countless micro-adjustments in station protocols. Ramp gradients changed. Scanner calibrations widened. The simple act of these officers doing their jobs reshaped the physical world around them. Comparative studies of post-reform societies showed a consistent pattern. Cultures that embraced disability accommodations saw interspecies STEM collaboration rates spike. The Meridian Center became living proof. Its research wing housed joint projects between draconid neural specialists, human biomechanical engineers, and even a contingent of Calaxian fluid dynamicists investigating how various wing imperfections affected atmospheric resistance. The published papers carried authorship credits from multiple species, something almost unheard of in pre-reform academia. The Draconid Summit invitation arrived on metallic parchment so thin it threatened to cut bare fingers. The wax seal bore Kestra's personal crest, a winged figure rising from a mobility chair, designed by one of her first students. Inside, the holo projector activated to display the event's full program. Her keynote slot appeared in prime position, the title glowing faintly, How Broken Wings Teach Whole Societies to Soar. The center's comm system pinged with incoming messages as Kestra examined the invitation. 7 were from former students now working as flight instructors themselves. 3 contained footage of hatchlings attempting their first wing beats under the revised training protocols. The most recent came from Elder Selenith, a single sentence asking if Thomas still had the ceremonial robes from his adoption. In the training arena below, a young Draconid with underdeveloped wing joints struggled to maintain hover position. His instructor, a graduate missing 2 primary feathers on her right side, adjusted his harness without comment. The motion sensors displayed his altitude fluctuations in real time. 0.8 meters, 0.9. Imperfect but airborne. Thomas joined Kestra at the observation deck, his station security badge now joined by the clan sigil burned into his forearm. The scar had healed raised and shiny, catching the light differently than untouched skin. He nodded toward the struggling student. They'll need to put railings on all the balconies soon. Analysis of the Skyborn movement's growth showed a viral adoption pattern. Each trained student went on to mentor 12 others on average. The math suggested complete cultural saturation within 2 generations. Already, 73 Draconid creches had abandoned the old flight or failure evaluations, replacing them with adaptive developmental timelines. Kestra's wrist unit displayed the latest batch of messages from traditionalist holdouts. The language had shifted from outright denial to grudging accommodations. One elder's missive stood out, an invitation to consult on modifying sacred temples' aerial approaches for wing-impaired pilgrims. Resistance was learning to reframe itself as gradual acceptance. Kestra's next flight drill drew an audience. Not protesters or officials, but ordinary station crew, human, Draconid, even a cluster of Zil engineers. They watched in silence as she executed a full 10-meter flight with 2 mid-air course corrections. The landing still needed work. She overshot the mark by 3 paces. But when she folded her wings, the station's acoustics carried the sound to every observer. The distinct rustle flick of properly engaged flight muscles. A sound no simulation could fake. Messages continued flooding in.
One stood out from the rest. A formal invitation embossed with the seal of the Draconid Medical Consortium.
Not for Kestra. For Dr. Martinez. The subject line read, Knowledge Exchange Summit on Neurological Reactivation. The attached agenda suggested 3 days of seminars. Interestingly, the proposed location was Station Medbay 3, not any Draconid facility. Kestra found Thomas recalibrating the 0G simulator later that evening. She didn't mention the invitation, just handed him a new datapad displaying schematics, an adaptive flight harness designed for hatchlings. The blueprint bore markings from 4 different species engineering traditions. They'll need these, she said. No celebration in her tone, no grand pronouncements, just a practical observation about inevitable next steps. The original leaked video kept circulating. No attempts were made to purge it from networks. Analysis showed it had been viewed over 2 million times across 17 systems. Comment sections revealed a curious pattern. The angriest detractors often returned days later, with subdued follow-up questions about therapeutic timelines. Bay 12 security cameras remained offline. Nobody filed repair requests. The Integration Festival's central amphitheater held 14 species worth of delegates, their collective murmurs bouncing off the dome's acoustic panels. The rules were clear. Any recognized member could petition for formal recognition of new practices. Kestra's application arrived 17 minutes before deadline, citing Clause 8 to 12. No flight demonstration required for wing-impaired Draconids seeking cultural accommodation. The loophole had existed for centuries, written to save traditionalists the discomfort of seeing failed flight attempts. No one expected someone to weaponize it. Her assigned time slot opened to an empty stage. Protocol dictated petitioners begin their demonstrations immediately. No introductions, no preambles. The crowd's murmurs turned questioning as the allotted 30 seconds passed without movement. Then Thomas emerged from the wings, pushing Kestra's mobility chair at ceremonial pace. The chair itself was different, stripped of most supports, reduced to a simple wheeled frame. He stopped at center stage. The amphitheater's lighting arrays caught every scuff mark on the chair's arms, every place where Kestra's claws had worn the paint thin. The audience didn't realize what was happening until she gripped the armrests and stood without assistance. There were no stabilizers this time, no hidden support straps, just sheer muscle control as she rose, her wings unfolding to their full span. Still uneven, still bearing the asymmetrical development of someone who'd earned flight capacity the hard way. The crowd's intake of breath registered on the acoustics. Readout, a spike at 2000 hertz, concurrent with Draconid's secondary ear flaring. Kestra waited for silence. Not the respectful quiet of attentive audiences, but the deeper stillness that comes when observers forget protocol entirely. Her first words weren't in standard, but high draconic, the formal dialect used for ancestral recitations. The translation matrix stuttered before resolving. Pyrexis, the Determined's third scroll, states, "True strength lies not in perfect wings, but in the will to fly with whatever the universe provides." The reference landed like a detonation in certain quarters. 3 elder draconids stood so fast their ceremonial stools toppled. Studies of interspecies policy shifts show public demonstrations account for 62% of major disability accommodations. The math leans heavily on moments like this, when abstract arguments become undeniable physical realities. Kestra paced the stage's marked circle, her gait retaining only a trace of the old imbalance. Each step emphasized how much had changed. The mobility chair wasn't a prison anymore, just another tool. She paused beneath the dome's central oculus where natural light filtered through the station's atmospheric shields. The illumination caught the newer growth along her wing membranes, the healthy sheen where scales had once been dull from disuse. "You've all seen the recordings," she continued, switching to standard for the mixed species audience. "Now see the truth. The takeoff required 3 running steps, far more than a naturally flighted draconid would need. Her initial wing beats lacked the synchronized power of traditional flyers, the right side compensating for the left's lingering weakness. But she rose, not the smooth vertical ascent of elite draconids, but an undeniable lifting of mass against gravity. 2 meters, 5, 7. High enough that the entire amphitheater could watch her shadow ripple across their faces as she passed overhead. Silence held until she banked. A clumsy turn by draconid standards, requiring visible adjustments mid-maneuver. Someone gasped. The sound cracked the collective disbelief. Motion sensors later showed 17 delegates reaching upward involuntarily as she passed, fingers and claws outstretched toward the impossible sight. Elder Selenith remained statue still in her front row seat. Her ceremonial crest hadn't moved, but molten tracks shimmered down her scaled cheeks, draconid tears hot enough to vaporize on contact with air. When Kestra completed her circuit and touched down with one stuttering backstep, the elder spoke without rising. The stories were true. The words carried through the amphitheater's perfect acoustics. For the assembled draconids, the reference needed no explanation. Pyrexis's early flights had been described in just these terms: unsteady, laborious, glorious in their refusal of limitations. Official histories smoothed those details over centuries of retelling, creating a myth of effortless mastery. Selenith's reaction suggested she knew the older versions. The festival's rules allowed no immediate commentary or debate. Petitioners completed their demonstrations and exited. Thomas fell into step behind Kestra as she walked off stage, her wings folding with unconscious pride now, the motion smoother than it had been even a week prior. They'd reached the service corridor before the uproar began behind them, a wave of voices crashing against the dome's acoustics. Station security logs recorded 19 separate diplomatic alerts triggered in the aftermath. 3 draconid clans formally rescinded prior objections to adaptive flight training. 2 others filed counter-petitions demanding the demonstration be classified as aberrant behavior. The medical contingent's response proved most telling, an urgent request for Kestra's training regimens. submitted through official channels this time. Backstage, Thomas found a draconid hatchling waiting by their exit route. The youngling's underdeveloped wings hung at an awkward angle, one joint clearly malformed from birth. No attendants accompanied them, just a single data crystal clutched in two small claws. The message played without preamble when Kestra took it. Selenith sends this. Clan records from the first flight era. The files contained more than historical accounts. Buried in the metadata were access codes to private medical archives, 400 years of suppressed data on wing development anomalies. The hatchling watched Kestra scan the contents, their inner eyelids flicking sideways in awe when she reached out to adjust their bad wings' posture with careful claws. Across the station, comm traffic spiked as delegates relayed what they'd witnessed. The debate fractured along generational lines, younger draconids invoking Pyrexis's early struggles, traditionalists insisting Kestra must possess some undiscovered advantage. Notably absent were any claims of fakery. Too many had seen the uneven wing beats up close, the visible effort behind every meter gained. In Maintenance Bay 12, the unofficial tally sheet still hung on the wall, now reading Attempt 231 beside the latest flight metrics. Kestra added the new numbers without ceremony upon their return. The act retained its quiet defiance even as the space around it filled with donated equipment and hopeful messages. A festival attendant arrived hours later with formal documentation. Kestra's petition for recognition had been accepted, not through majority vote but quiet administrative ruling. The paperwork included an unusual amendment. Demonstration deemed sufficient to qualify petitioner as flight-capable under Clause 812, thus nullifying applicability of said clause. In bureaucratic terms, she'd flown well enough to invalidate the very loophole that allowed her to prove she could fly. News feeds picked up the story within minutes. Analysts noted how carefully the language avoided endorsing neural retraining, focusing instead on individual achievement. The distinction mattered little to the 17 other draconids who submitted similar petitions before day's end, each citing Kestra's case as precedent. Dr. Martinez's medbay comms overloaded by evening. The surge came not from draconids but from human and Tazil spacers, seeking adaptations of the techniques for their own neural rehabilitation. None mentioned the festival footage directly, just sudden interest in cross-species motor function studies. Station engineers had to reroute bandwidth twice to accommodate the traffic. Thomas found Kestra on the observation deck that night, watching shuttle traffic weave between orbital platforms. Her wings flexed unconsciously, not practiced maneuvers, just the casual adjustments of someone growing comfortable with newfound ability. The station's external lights caught the scars along her primary joints, silvery against darker scales. "They'll call it 1,000 different things," she said without turning. "Genetic exception. Statistical outlier, anything but what it was." A docking freighter passed below, its thrusters flaring as it aligned with the lower bays. The glow illuminated Kestra's face just enough to reveal the tightness around her eyes. Not pain, but the strain of sustaining change across generations, not just one body. Thomas leaned against the railing beside her. First ones always get the worst labels. His shoulder bumped her folded wing, a human gesture that would have been unthinkable months prior. Now it barely registered as unusual. From above came the distinctive sound of draconid wings in motion, not the powerful sweeps of trained flyers, but the uneven beats of beginners. 3 younger clan members practiced takeoffs from the upper gantries, their forms mirroring Kestra's early attempts. None had discarded their mobility harnesses yet, but the assist lights blinked at minimal settings. The station's comm system chimed with an incoming priority message: Council recognition of adaptive flight as an official branch of draconid athletics. The accompanying funding allocations suggested certain elders had prepared the measures well before the festival. Kestra's answering snort sent vapor swirling into the climate-controlled air. She flexed her wings once more before heading inside, not for rest but to review the latest batch of messages from would-be flyers. The hatchling from backstage trailed behind, their steps light with something that hadn't existed before that afternoon. Hope, when given physical form, rarely resembles what we expect. Sometimes it's a perfect spiral of wings against station lights. Sometimes it's a grainy video looping endlessly across systems. Tonight it looked like a limping youngling struggling to keep pace with their hero, already planning which muscles to strengthen first. The festival banners still fluttered in the artificial breeze as they walked away, their golden threads catching the light like so many newly awakened neural pathways. The amendment arrived with minimal ceremony, a data packet marked Draconid Code Revision 1147, delivered to station administration. The document contained 17 words that rewrote 4 centuries of precedent. The wingless clause is hereby nullified. No flourishes. No justifications. Just the quiet dismantling of an edict born from desperation during the Third Famine, when Draconid councils had voted to withhold resources from those deemed unlikely to contribute to survival. Legal retrieval systems traced the clause's origins to emergency rationing policies. The original language had been clinical, nutritional prioritization protocols for non-flight capable members during resource scarcity. Over generations, it hardened into cultural dogma. Flight-defined Draconid worth. Review log showed 37 prior attempts to repeal it. All had failed before reaching debate stages. 3 ambassadors resigned within the hour. Traditionalist leader Gorvath made his exit dramatic, scattering ceremonial wing sheaths across the council floor, each clatter echoing through the chamber's acoustics. His departure speech lasted 12 seconds. This marks the end of true Draconid culture. The statement would later be clipped and looped by reformist factions as ironic celebration footage. The amendment's fine print contained surprises. Subsection B allocated funds for adaptive flight technology research, with earmarks specifically matching the 20,000 credit sum Thomas had paid for Kestra's guardianship. The repayment hadn't been negotiated. Vrath authorized it through back channels, circumventing traditionalist opposition by classifying it as medical reparations. Galactic policy databases show rapid reversals often follow personal demonstrations rather than abstract debates. The pattern held here. Within 6 hours of Kestra's festival flight, 17 Draconid clans submitted letters retracting prior objections to neural retraining. By contrast, the 3 resigning ambassadors took 14 minutes each to draft their protests. Timestamps revealed excessive revisions, as if struggling to articulate positions that had previously required no defense. Kestra received the news in Maintenance Bay 12, midway through adjusting a younger Draconid's flight harness. The alert pinged on her wrist unit alongside a priority message from Elder Selenith. Clan induction ceremony scheduled. Bring your human. The attached file contained details for Thomas's honorary adoption, an ancient practice revived specifically for this occasion. The ceremony demanded precise choreography. Clan adoptions required flight-based rituals, each movement encoding centuries of meaning. Kestra spent 3 hours with Thomas rehearsing the most critical sequence, the oath moment where he would lift her aloft, wings spread, while she recited lineage ties. Her training made the physical part feasible. The cultural weight was another matter. "You're sure about this?" Thomas checked the harness connections for the 12th time. The ceremonial rig lacked safety features from their training equipment. No emergency grav dampeners, no auto-balancing gyros. Just straps and sheer physical coordination. Kestra's answering hiss carried amusement. "You've carried heavier engine parts." She flexed her wings to their full span, the left still quivering slightly at full extension. The asymmetry had lessened over weeks of relentless drills, but remained visible to trained observers. Clan elders filled the ceremonial hall in unspoken factions. Traditionalists clustered near the exits, crest feathers held stiff in disapproval. Reformists occupied the central platforms, many with younger, wing-impaired Draconids perched at their sides. Camera drones hovered at regulation distance, close enough to capture details, far enough to avoid intruding on sacred space. The ceremony opened with 17 generations of recited lineage. Kestra's voice never wavered through the marathon recitation, though her claws left fresh gouges in the stone lectern. When the final ancestor's name echoed through the hall's perfect acoustics, she turned and spread her wings toward Thomas, the formal invitation gesture. Every muscle in his body remembered the training as he stepped forward. Left hand under the primary wing joint, right supporting the secondary tendons. The lift needed perfect timing. Too fast would strain developing muscles, too slow would insult the ritual's urgency. 300 flight drills had prepared them for this, though none with the added pressure of 500 watching elders. Thomas exhaled and lifted. The center's equipment room told its own story. Early prototypes of Kestra's original training rig sat preserved in clear cases alongside sleek modern equivalents. The progression showed how far adaptive technology had come, from jerry-rigged cargo straps to streamlined neural interfaces. One wall screen cycled through schematics of devices currently in testing, including a prototype mind-wing synchronization implant being developed jointly by Draconid and human researchers. Thomas checked his duty roster for the summit security detail. The system automatically flagged 3 new accommodations needed for his team: wider access ramps, adjustable scanner heights, and sign language interpretation for a deaf officer. 5 years earlier, each request would have triggered bureaucratic battles. Now they processed instantly, logged as standard operational requirements. In the central training pool, students practiced aquatic wing exercises developed from Thomas's original water barrel concepts. The modifications showed in their technique: less struggle, more precision. A Calaxian observer recorded their movements for an ongoing study about cross-species adaptation techniques. Their latest paper hypothesized that imperfect learning methods might actually enhance neural plasticity compared to traditional training. Kestra's assistant approached with the summit travel itinerary. The documents included special provisions for her mobility chair, dietary needs, and notably, a request to demonstrate short flight capabilities during her keynote. The language carefully avoided calling it a demonstration, though, opting instead for illustrative movement sequences. The center's archival footage played on loops throughout the facility. One monitor currently showed Kestra's first public flight, those shaky 7 wing beats that started everything. Beside it, real-time feeds displayed current students performing the same maneuvers with varying degrees of success. The comparison charted progress in lived experience rather than abstract metrics. Night cycles brought quieter activity to the center. Maintenance crews worked the late shift, their routines now including checks on specialized equipment. One human tech adjusted the grip settings on a Draconid flight simulator while humming an old station work song. His assistant, a wing-impaired student earning credits through the work-study program, matched his rhythm with methodical calibration checks. Kestra often lingered after hours in the observation deck. The starfield beyond the viewports provided neutral ground for reflection, the vastness making even revolutionary changes feel small. Tonight she studied the Draconid Summit's event list again, her claw tracing the names of participating clans. 3 that had once called her defective now sponsored adaptive flight research grants. Thomas found her there after his security shift ended. He carried 2 steaming mugs, one standard station brew, the other blended to Draconid taste preferences. They'd fallen into this routine years earlier, using the quiet hours to assess the day's progress. Neither commented on how far those assessments had shifted from technical adjustments to broader cultural observations. The center's incoming student roster pinged with new applications. 27 this cycle, a mix of Draconids, humans, and 3 from species the system initially flagged as ineligible for flight training, before the filters updated automatically. The attached medical files showed the usual diversity of conditions, plus 1 anomaly, a Calaxian fluid sac dysfunction case requesting adaptation of wing techniques for buoyancy control. Elder Selenith's second message arrived near midnight station time. The formal language couldn't disguise the significance, an official inquiry about expanding the Meridian model to 3 Draconid homeworld academies. The proposed curriculum included joint instructor placements with humans and other species. Attached budgetary considerations showed allocations for cross-disability research teams. Kestra set a reminder to review summit speaking points in the morning. The Meridian alert tone had been customized by students, a ripple of wing beats fading into interstellar static. 300 yards away in the dormitory wing, hatchlings training under the new regimes dreamed in gravity-defying colors their ancestors never imagined. The T-mug sat empty when dawn cycle lights activated. Night workers logged off, day staff arrived, and the center's great doors slid open to another rotation of determination and incremental triumph. Outside, the station's docking bays hummed with vessels bringing new students, skeptical observers, and increasingly, curious traditionalists drawn by rumors of what imperfect flight could teach even the fully winged. Kestra's keynote draft remained unfinished on her terminal. The conclusion would write itself after seeing the summit attendees' expressions when her students demonstrated mid-speech. For now, the working title sufficed, a declaration and challenge woven together. How broken wings teach whole societies to soar. Thomas slid his tray across the table without ceremony. That simple act, half a meal shared with someone deemed worthless, cracked open a galaxy of possibilities. He wasn't thinking about revolutions, just wasting food. 5 years later, the Meridian Center's halls echo with wing beats both perfect and imperfect. Kestra teaches hatchlings to fly with whatever their bodies provide. The banquets that once excluded her now feature accessibility ramps beside ceremonial platforms. Change doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it starts with an unclaimed seat and untouched plate, a choice to see someone others ignore. The next civil rights movement might be sitting alone in your cafeteria right now. Thomas paid in dinner scraps. The return became priceless. Thomas's finger hovered over the transfer authorization. Accepting would brand him a traitor. Refusing made him a hypocrite, willing to help only when it cost nothing. The datapad's surface chilled his palm, temperature adjusting to prevent overheating during high-stakes decisions. A design feature he'd never appreciated until now. Kestra moved for the first time since entering. Her chair's stabilizers whined as she jerked forward, one clawed hand gripping Thomas's sleeve. The contact violated at least 3 Draconid propriety rules. Her inner eyelids flicked sideways, not the slow nictation of composure but the rapid flutter of distress. "Don't, I'm not worth your honor." The words came out too even, like she'd practiced them in her head many times before. Wrath exhaled through his secondary nostrils, a Draconid sigh. His crest feathers twitched in dismissal. The defective speaks of value. Interesting. Station lighting shifted automatically as a freighter passed outside the viewport, casting slatted shadows across the negotiation table. The alternating bands of light and dark turned Kestra's mobility harness into something resembling prison bars. She released Thomas's sleeve, her claws leaving tiny pucker marks in the fabric. The station accounting AI chose that moment to signal an incoming alert. Not about the credit transfer. A medical update from the rehabilitation wing, Kestra's latest neural scans. The projection appeared unsolicited between them, rotating a 3D model of her spinal column. Red markers highlighted the dormant pathways. Yellow annotations in the station surgeon's hand read, "Neurologically intact. Activation potential, 87% with targeted stimulation." Vrath's pupils contracted to thin vertical slits. His talon sheaths scraped the table as he leaned in, examining the scan like a merchant assessing damaged goods. Irrelevant. Flight circuits require muscular development impossible without. Human physical therapy rebuilt a TSIL ambassador's ambulatory system after gravitational crushing. The accounting AI interjected. Odd behavior for a system designed to track debits, not debate medicine. Its projection shifted to show comparative case studies from 3 species. Thomas didn't touch the datapad, just turned it so Kestra could see. The smuggling routes glowed there, awaiting his authorization. "Your call." 2 conflicting impulses played across her features. Draconid culture conditioned individuals to accept their assigned value, but something in the medical scans had sparked a different reaction. Her claws flexed unconsciously, the motion activating dormant muscles along her underdeveloped wing joints. Vrath noticed. His tail stiffened, the spiked tip twitching in controlled arcs, a calculating gesture, not an angry one. The human misunderstands. He pushed a revised contract forward. "We'll accept 10,000 credits now. The remainder contingent upon flight. Capability attainment within 1 standard cycle." The new terms gleamed gold in the projection, a concession, color-coded for importance. The proposal balanced on a razor's edge. Enough to acknowledge potential progress, but worded so failure would reinforce existing biases. Thomas recognized the structure. It mirrored human corporate probation agreements. "And if she fails?" Vrath's answering expression showed too many teeth. "Then her debt transfers to you permanently. Standard galactic indenturement protocols apply." He didn't need to elaborate. Everyone knew indentured workers forfeited voting rights, travel permits, even reproductive licenses until debts cleared. Kestra made a sound low in her throat, the Draconid equivalent of a swallowed protest. Her claws dug into her thigh scales, leaving pale pressure marks. Outside, a docking alarm sounded, some freighter locking onto the lower rings. The vibration carried through the station's skeleton, making the liquid in Thomas's forgotten drink ripple with concentric circles. He studied the indenturement clause. The language was standard, but one subclause stood out. Debtor assumes all medical rights and responsibilities. Buried in dense legal terminology, it granted him authority over Kestra's treatment and prevented Draconid traditionalists from interfering. Vrath misread Thomas's hesitation as reluctance. His crest feathers lifted slightly in anticipation. Alternatively, the original offer remains no. Thomas keyed his acceptance on the revised terms before the sentence finished. The data pad chimed pleasantly as interstellar banking networks registered the transaction. Kestra's medical feed updated instantly under the new custodial permissions. Treatment schedules expanded from basic maintenance to active rehabilitation. Equipment requests shifted from luxury items to essential therapies. The system even auto-generated a suggested training regimen, human-derived, muscle development techniques adapted for Draconid. Physiology. Vrath examined the finalized contract with tilted head, predatory body language. But his talons retracted slightly, sheaths clicking back into place. Humans and their irrational investments. He said it like an observation, not an insult. The station's humidity made his scales appear darker than usual, more onyx than anthracite. Thomas didn't stand when Vrath departed. The door sealed with a hydraulic hiss, leaving chemical traces of Draconid musk, sour where stress pheromones lingered. Kestra remained statue still except for the tremors along her wing joints, tiny, involuntary contractions the medical scans had predicted. Her voice emerged stripped of affect. "You should have let me refuse." Thomas powered down the data pad. The smuggler route coordinates dissolved into static. "Didn't realize you were the only one allowed to make bad decisions today." The station accounting AI helpfully projected his new financial status. Negative balance flashing red, payment deadlines cascading down the right margin. At current salary, the debt would take 14 years to clear, assuming no interest accrual. Kestra studied the numbers with a Draconid's innate grasp of mathematics. Her pupils contracted, precise calculation response. 14 years, 3 months, Thomas shrugged. Plenty of hazardous duty assignments opening up near the breach. For the first time since the meeting began, Kestra took deliberate action unasked. Her chair's stabilizers hummed as she maneuvered to face him directly, a Draconid gesture of confrontation. The red accounting glow turned her amber eyes fiery. "I will fly. Not an aspiration. A vow." For nearly a century, indenturement contracts had been structured to ensure failure, a legal tool for reinforcing hierarchies rather than enabling change. What neither Vrath nor his superiors had considered was the consequence should someone actually succeed. Thomas's workstation chimed, an incoming message from the maintenance chief. The subject line read, "Bay 12 access approved." Attached schematics showed cargo straps reconfigured as resistance training apparatus, zero-grav harness mods, and, curiously, several repurposed water filtration barrels. Kestra's claws flexed again. Not in distress this time, but anticipation. The motion pulled at the newly awakened muscles along her back, making the thin membrane between her underdeveloped wing joints flutter like a sail catching its first breeze. Dr. Martinez's med scan revealed the cruel irony. Kestra's wings were perfect. The problem lived in her spinal cord. The neural imaging lit up the display in cool blues and flickering gold. Every flight circuit present, every muscle connection point precisely where anatomy textbooks said they should be. Only the signals were missing, like a theater stage lit for performers who never emerged from the wings. The dormant pathways showed up as faint gray traces, neural connections grown but never activated. Human medical tech labeled them in floating text. T3, T7 signal disruption. No structural damage detected. Dr. Martinez rotated the projection with practiced flicks of her fingers. "See here? The wiring exists. The current just stops flowing." Kestra's reflection shimmered in the medbay's glass surfaces. Her wings folded tight against her back, the thin membrane between joints catching the light. No scars, no malformations. Wings that should have carried a Draconid to cruising altitude without strain. Adaptive therapy came with its own kind of violence. Not the dramatic sort, but the slow, methodical kind that left patients sweating through their scales. The electrostimulation array looked innocuous enough. Thin silver nodes adhered to Kestra's spine, connected to a humming control unit. But when activated, they delivered precise jolts to sleeping neural pathways. Not enough to cause pain, just enough to make the body take notice. The banquet hall was alive with interstellar delegates feasting, except for one draconid girl silent in her mobility chair. Then a human security officer did something unthinkable. He offered her half his meal. That simple act would ignite a revolution. This isn't just a story about sharing food. It's about how one moment of compassion shattered an entire system that deemed certain lives worthless. What happens next will challenge everything you think about disability, dignity, and the power of small acts. The Harvest Festival buzzed with the hum of translation devices and the clatter of ceremonial plates. Spiced Yavri steamed on every table while draconid delegates clinked crystal goblets with practiced wing flourishes. Every motion in the hall followed the precise choreography of status displays, except for Kestra's stillness. Her mobility chair's hover field cast a faint blue glow on the floor, the only light not reflecting off polished scales. Tradition dictated that draconids eat only after demonstrating aerial grace. The higher the acrobatics, the better the seating. The first pick of portions. Kestra's place at the far end of the table wasn't an accident. Delegates facing her direction found sudden reasons to examine their claws or adjust their translator earpieces. Thomas noticed three things in rapid succession: the wedge of untouched meat on her plate, the way her feathers lay flat against her neck, and the server who'd ignored her refill request. His own tray held standard station rations, nutrient-dense, visually unappealing. Maintenance crews ate when they could, not when protocol allowed. Xenopsychology shows most caste systems use food as a social weapon. The draconids perfected it. Hatchlings unable to fly by their second molting received half rations at communal meals. Those with malformed wings got scraps. Kestra, with her non-functional spinal connectors, should have been left in a creche. Her presence at the festival was already a technical violation. Thomas moved before considering the consequences. His boots scuffed against the floor as he crossed the divide between human and draconid seating. He didn't bow, didn't announce himself, just slid his tray across the table until it bumped hers. The metal scrape cut through the murmuring hall. 5 draconid elders froze mid-conversation. 3 junior diplomats dropped their eating tools. Someone hissed through their secondary nostrils, the sound a draconid makes when witnessing profound obscenity. Thomas had broken 6 protocols at once. Approaching unpresented, not waiting for wing display, offering cross-species food exchange, interrupting a hierarchy meal, acknowledging a non-contributor, and worst of all, acting like none of this mattered. Kestra's inner eyelids flicked sideways in a double blink. The translator dangling from her chair emitted a soft chime as it struggled with human speech patterns. When she finally spoke, the word hung in the air like a struck bell. Why? The question wasn't about the food. Every draconid in the room knew what she really asked. Why violate centuries of tradition? Why risk social censure? Why see her when even her own clutchmates pretended she didn't exist? Thomas poked at the reconstituted protein on his tray. Portion sizes here are ridiculous, he said, deliberately misunderstanding. You'd be doing me a favor. Across the hall, a senior wingmaster began the formal complaint gesture, all 4 wing fingers splaying in protest. Kestra watched Thomas push the tray closer, then did something no draconid had done in living memory. She accepted charity in public. Her claws clicked against the polymer surface as she dragged a portion onto her plate. The reaction wasn't immediate outrage, but something far more dangerous: uncertainty. Younger draconids exchanged rapid subvocal clicks, their feathers ruffling in conflicting patterns. One envoy actually leaned forward, nostrils flaring at the scent of human spices mixing with sacred festival foods. The entire elaborate structure of the meal trembled on its axis. Kestra ate with careful precision, her eyes never leaving Thomas's face. She took exactly half, measured to the gram as though proving she understood the transaction's unspoken terms. When she finished, she didn't thank him, another deliberate choice. Gratitude would have implied hierarchy. Instead, she tapped a claw against her now empty water glass. Thomas refilled it from his own canteen. The water arced in a graceful stream, catching the overhead lights. For a fleeting instant, It mirrored the ceremonial liquid offerings draconids made during flight displays. The parallel wasn't lost on the crowd. Murmurs spread through the hall like a sudden draft. At the high table, a wingmaster signaled for a protocol officer. The attendant rushed forward, their crest feathers slicked back in apprehension. Before they could intervene, Kestra did something unprecedented. She lifted her water glass toward Thomas in a perfect mimicry of the draconid salute. Not the lesser guest toast, but the full wingmaster acknowledgement reserved for equals. Every draconid in the room experienced the same physiological response. Their pupils contracted, their secondary ears folded flat, their tail spurs retracted. The gesture was impossible. The wingless couldn't perform rites requiring flight morphology. Yet there it was, water held at the precise 42-degree angle dictated by tradition, the exact depth of liquid demonstrating respect without submission. Thomas didn't know the significance, but he recognized tension when he saw it. His response was purely human. He raised his own canteen and drank deeply. The lack of ceremony might have been offensive if not for its artless sincerity. The protocol officer wavered mid-step. Their training covered interspecies conflicts, not spontaneous acts rewriting cultural codes. Behind them, a junior diplomat made a small, wounded sound in their throat, the draconid equivalent of a gasp. Two others began the wing motions for historical precedent, but aborted halfway through, their muscles locked in indecision. Kestra set her glass down with deliberate firmness, the clink punctuating the silence. Her inner eyelids nictitated once slowly, the way draconids do when processing paradigm shifts. Then she straightened in her chair, the movement pulling the shimmering mobility harness taut across her underdeveloped flight muscles. The reaction rippled through the hall in stages. First confusion, then dawning comprehension, then something akin to panic, because positioned just so, with the lamplight catching the faint ridge of unused muscle along her back, Kestra looked for the first time in her life, like she might one day fly. The complaint arrived on Thomas's terminal before his shift ended. The formal document pulsed red in his vision, the universal color for diplomatic urgency. The draconid security seal took up half the screen, a stylized wing claw emblem encircling a list of violations. The primary charge, nutritional interference. Interspecies stations always had protocols. Humans called them cultural misunderstanding buffers, carefully calibrated rules to prevent diplomatic fires. What Thomas had done fell under Section 14D, disruption of essential social structures through unauthorized resource redistribution. The language was dry, bureaucratic. The implications were not. Station archives revealed 12 similar incidents over the past cycle. Human crew members sharing meals with Calaxian introverts, offering water to dehydrated Tzil, leaving spare nutrient packs where disadvantaged dock workers might find them. Each incident logged under harmless infraction, followed by an officially worded warning. This was different. Senior Wingmaster Vrath himself had signed the complaint. His access codes allowed him to attach a private addendum, a single line scrolling beneath the legal text. Cease provisioning the defective, or we will revoke your docking permits. Thomas leaned back in his chair, flexing his hands. The station's climate control hummed a half-tone too high where he sat. Out the viewport, a draconid cruiser hung in orbital berth D12, its polished hull reflecting the distant starlight like a curved knife. Commander Hines arrived 7 minutes later, the station's legal feed already projecting from her wrist unit. She didn't bother with preliminaries. They want you to stop feeding her. A holographic list appeared between them, the cost analysis filed by the Draconid Trade Liaison. Vrath's economic projections were thorough. Wingless draconids required specialized mobility chairs, modified living quarters, adapted nutrition formulas, over an average lifespan 20,000 credits. The price tag glowed brighter than the other text, designed to draw the eye. One Starship engine, Hines translated. The station's database automatically pulled up the equivalent human item, a Mark 7 thruster assembly. Thomas touched the projection, spreading the itemized list. Every expenditure accounted for. Specialized scale soap to prevent infections between Kestra's atrophied wing joints. 150 credits per month. Acoustic dampeners for her quarters. Draconid's secondary ears remained sensitive even when wings didn't develop properly. The longest subcategory, lost opportunity costs. Hines exhaled through her nose. The dangerous part is they're not wrong under their own frameworks. Look. She swiped to galaxy-wide precedents. 7 spacefaring species maintained codified distinctions between productive and non-productive members. 3 legally permitted postnatal separation when defects were confirmed. None of this registered surprise on Thomas's face. His fingers moved before conscious decision, pulling up the guardianship transfer forms.